I saw what THORChain was doing. Just like you, I was amazed, super impressed. I knew about Uniswap before and AMMs. THORChain just took it to a whole other level. And I started to grasp the importance of what they were doing and how hard it is to have so much liquidity and how hard it is to route it and how hard it is to have proper reliability and kind of uptime. And I just think that it is so important. It needs to have redundancy. But redundancy needs to be kind of independent of that system. You could build more and more redundancy, which THORChain has been building within itself, but I think there has to be exogenous redundancy, and that's what Maya is attempting to do.
One of the more exciting innovations in the crypto space has been, of course, DeFi and decentralized exchanges, but especially THORChain, because it actually lets you swap native assets for native assets, not do all this with a bunch of Ethereum tokens, for example. And so it basically, stuff like this can completely replace in time centralized exchange infrastructure and build like a whole new financial system that's decentralized and not prone to censorship. THORChain was the first and only one of these for a while. But there is another. One major friendly fork of THORChain, the Maya protocol, aims to add redundancy to the decentralized exchange infrastructure system, but also provide a few key unique differences and kind of continue to evolve the space. So just like there was Bitcoin and then there was a whole bunch of different imitators and then a bunch of other projects that built on it, we're kind of starting to see the same thing evolve now with THORChain. And so I'm really excited to speak with the founder of Maya to see kind of how this is going to unfold in the future. Hey everyone, I have the wonderful pleasure of speaking to the one and only Aaluxx of the Maya project. How's it going, man?
Hi, Joel. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great having you here. And I've been kind of watching Maya for a long time. In fact, it was Chad Bareford who first mentioned it in one of my podcasts years ago, I believe. He just mentioned that there were a couple of forks of THORChain that were kind of coming up, and he kind of mentioned mine, and like from that I just started looking for it and finding everything I could. And then it's been interesting to see this sort of evolution of both projects and, you know, I guess the place in the world that each of them has comparative to each other. But so before we jump into all that, do you want to just introduce yourself and what you do, and then say about kind of the summary of like what is Maya?
Sure. This is Aaluxx, co-founder of Maya Protocol. We've been in this road for almost 2 years now. Maya is essentially a friendly fork of THORChain with our own kind of proposals for change sprinkled on top to kind of try and add value to the cross-chain technology ecosystem, which we believe is a future that won't happen by itself. We need to put in the effort to make it happen, because it's the only way we will fulfill blockchain's reason for existing, I would say. We're working on that in our own little side of the court. I come from a startup and software development background, although I'm not a dev myself. One of our co-founders, Itzamna, is a tech lead, and he gets all of that. I mention that because many people believe that if they don't have a dev background, they have no place in blockchain, but I strongly disagree. So just kind of a shout out there. Anybody can add value somehow. That's us. That's what we're doing. And long road ahead still, but very excited for what we're doing.
Yeah, so people who watch the channel might be familiar with THORChain to begin with, but the basics of THORChain is it's basically a cross-chain decentralized exchange that doesn't use wrapped assets. You can exchange thing for thing. And rather than an atomic exchange where you kind of have to find someone who wants to exchange the exact same thing at that exact price, and then when you do, you hit a button. It's an automated market maker, meaning you can just trade anything for anything at any time, and there's liquidity pools and things like that. And other than swapping assets, there's a bunch of other stuff that it does, such as allowing you to provide liquidity and get some of that money, get some of the earnings from trading fees and stuff. And THORChain's working on some like lending stuff as well. So it's basically trying to make a whole decentralized financial system and not just like something really basic. And so,
Yeah,
uh,
that's cross chain, which is the important part.
yes,
Uh, yeah,
yes, and I remember the DeFi boom of what was it? This no, was it this last cycle? Maybe 2021 or something. I remember that,
yeah,
and I didn't really understand it that much, or I didn't care because everything was all these wrapped assets and tokens and things, and it wasn't until I heard about THORChain that started to make the rest of DeFi make sense to me because I'm like, okay, well, these are actual assets. You could, kind of go between each other. And after that, I'm kind of not seeing. I wouldn't say I'm not seeing a future for things like Uniswap, but I'm seeing just like why would anyone use something like that in all these wrapped assets and other things when you could just do it like that? So, what made you decide that rather than just be a THORChain fan and supporter, but to make something, I would say, competing but more complementary, right? But make something very similar. Why did there need to be something else?
sure. Well, I come from reading a lot of white papers and agreeing a lot with the vision of what blockchain should be. At the end of the day, is separating money from state. And
Mm-hmm.
I know you. I followed you as well, and I've seen that you're one to live fiatless.
Mm-hmm.
So you know why we're here and why we're doing it for. And yeah, I saw what Thorchin was doing. Just like you, I was amazed, super impressed. Um, yeah, I knew about Uniswap before and AMMs, but the Thorchin just took it to a whole other level. And I started to grasp the importance of what they were doing and how uh, hard it is to have so much liquidity and how hard it is to route it and how hard it is to have proper reliability and kind of uptime in what
Mm-hmm.
Thorchin is doing. And I just think that it is so important. It needs to have redundancy, but redundancy needs to be kind of independent of that system. You could build more and more redundancy, which Thorchin has been building within itself, but I think there has to be exogenous redundancy, and that's what Maya is attempting to do. Essentially, be at the second motor of the plane. Um, at the end of the day, THORChain seeks to be the backend of crypto liquidity cross chain, so people will be using them without even knowing that they're using it, and we will
Yeah.
see that soon with Trust Wallet. Huge shout out to that, and congrats to the THORChain team. Um, and likewise, if you're having so much backend infrastructure for this, it needs redundancy. And you see this all the time, Visa and MasterCard, just as an example.
Mm-hmm. Of
Banks
course.
don't want to rely on just one or the other. So they have both, and all banks use essentially both. Great thing, great thing for the world. So
Mm-hmm.
that's more or less what the rationale behind all of this is. But if we just launch a vanilla fork, we won't be successful either. We do need to understand that THORChain is incumbent here. They have the liquidity. We don't want to compromise that liquidity at all. We need to go out and search for more. And the only way
Mm-hmm.
to do that is having also some added value and kind of key difference so that people will be willing to fund and add liquidity to Maya itself.
Yeah. So instead of a vanilla fork, you're going for more of a cacao fork, right? It's a very bad joke,
Yeah,
but
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So what are the fundamental design differences between THORChain and Maya right now?
I would say there's one key difference. Like if there's obviously many little things and kind of changes to how we launch and how we distribute the tokens and how inflation, if at all, works, a bit on impermanent loss. But those are like minor things, just minor decisions that it's kind of that would be more like an A/B testing thing. Like we'll
Mm-hmm.
see how it works on THORChain versus Maya, and any one or the other can decide to change anytime during flight.
Mm-hmm.
What I would mention, kind of the major difference, is in what we call liquidity nodes, which fundamentally changes the way that the security works and its economic economic incentives work within Maya, which is a very simple difference in face value, but with huge implications. And that is that nodes in Maya, instead of uh, bonding the rune equivalent, which is called cacao, they bond liquidity provider units. That's all. That is a small change. Instead of adding these huge rune bonds, which is great for security and the market cap of rune, it is a bit capital inefficient, which was a great design in hindsight, like a great design from the get go, especially without the benefit of hindsight. But now that we see the system in action, this can be a way to increase twofold the capital efficiency. And we will test it out in Maya and see how it works. Basically, the benefits are you need half as much total capital. Players get almost twice as much APY if you assume the same liquidity and volume conditions. And you also need less node capital, and there's less latency between liquidity and node capital. So all of these just with a small change.
Essentially, it's kind of like, if I were to use a parallel, it's kind of like having like a, let's just say, a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake system where you have to pay miners and like stakers, and then finding a way of doing it with just one of those. So you don't need to kind of pay two different buckets of things, right?
Yeah. So the thing is, the question we have to ask ourselves: what is the bond for on THORChain? It's not to increase Rune's market cap. That was just a kind of a result. In reality, is to secure assets, and it's twofold. You have to have a bond that disincentivizes any one node from stealing from others, and also that it disincentivizes a network-wide collusion to steal LP funds. And those are two very different attack vectors. THORChain system obviously goes with flying colors in that regard. And Maya's design, the relative loss is a bit less, but hopefully the absolute loss by being able to have more liquidity will be increased. Just so at the end of the day, any loss is a detractor for a rational actor, and the absolute loss is only important for irrational actors, where the quantity is more notable than the percentage loss. But anyway, yeah, essentially everybody adds LP, so all of the capital in the network, all the TVL is going to work. It's working capital being swapped constantly, and just whenever somebody wants to be a node, they commit that capital to become a node. And it's capital at the end of the day. It can be slashed, and half of it is in cacao. So if network colludes, they lose that half of their assets. You do need to change the security assumptions a bit in the sense that on THORChain, the balance where uh, um, essentially APY is similar to both players. It's at 50-50% capital, and the kind of net zero for LPs, where LPs stop earning, so they actually leave, is at 33% node versus 67% LP capital, where half of this is Rune, and it's when pooled Rune equals bonded Rune, right? So the cliff, which is how I call it, is at 33% node capital and 67% LP capital. The balance is at 50-50. On Maya, we go way up. And the reason we can go way up over bonded is because now over bonding is not capital inefficient. Right now, if 100% of capital is in the pools, it's still 100% of capital by nodes, it's still 100% of capital in the pools. So we have to increase, or cliff is at 75% bond by nodes and 35% of capital by pure LPs, and the balance is around 85% and 15%. So higher up, but it sounds bad. Like, oh, now we need more capital for nodes, and we already need a lot of capital from nodes now in THORChain. Actually, it's the other way around. If you assume, for instance, $100 million of external assets on THORChain, the balance would be at $400 million because you need the $100 million of the pool and then $200 million by notes. So $400 million total, out of which $200 million are from notes. In Maya, conversely, you would have $200 million on pools, and that's all the capital, out of which 85%, so 170 million, is by nodes. So you actually have a decrease in total capital requirement by nodes in a similar system. Beneficial as well is that node exposure to Cacao is just 50% instead of 100%. So nodes that already have Bitcoin, already have ETH, most likely already have many of the assets supported by Maya, now just need to have half of the position being these kind of more at-risk assets, such as Cacao and Wind. So yeah,
Yeah.
just good things.
Yeah. And so if I could, I guess, speculate on the trade offs between the two systems, it seems like Maya's, you get higher liquidity for less total capital investment, right? So it's easier on that way. You also get, if you consider nodes to provide security, I guess you get higher security because you don't need the same capital to be fighting between two different things. And it's not as risky to, it's not as risky as if it was in one asset that's only about this network. So in a lot of ways, it's like better and more efficient in most ways, except the only, I guess, drawback thing is if the nodes wanted to collude to steal, for example, and they would obviously lose their cacao, but they would not. They would still have other assets that would not go to zero. So it makes it a
Correct.
little bit more likely in a. Basically, it sounds like Maya is more efficient and more secure in most cases, but then Rune is more in the absolute catastrophic cases of like entire network failure.
Yeah, like on the case you mentioned, nodes still would lose. So if nodes were a rational actor, they still lose. Just the relative loss is smaller than compared with THORChain, where the relative loss is much higher. But rational actors, like I mentioned, don't care about relative losses. They care about like there's a loss, not in. I'm not interested. And irrational actors, such as a government trying to censor THORChain, uh, don't care about the relative loss. They care about the absolute loss. How much will it take in total capital to take down the network? So as long as Maya's considerations make it be more likely to be larger, the absolute loss is larger, even if in relative terms it's smaller. So that's more or less the gist of it. So nodes still lose if they collude, which is the whole point. Another thing is in another catastrophic failure, which is Ragnarok. Ragnarok is essentially the fail-safe mechanism on THORChain where if things are going very badly, with a click of a button, nodes vote to close the network and give back all the capital. Nodes lose everything. They lose 100% because all the position was in ruin.
Yeah,
So
of
Maya at
course.
least has these where the Ragnarok keeps 50% of the capital for the nodes. So they just lost half of the position instead of the totality, which will make them more likely to be rational about that decision instead of trying to kind of delay it as much as possible. So I believe that will put also liquidity at less of a risk.
Yeah, so it's I guess a small, subtle but very important trade-off mechanism difference between the two.
Yeah, another part of the trade-off is Maya, well, Cacao market cap will forever be way smaller than THORChain's because of how the deterministic value works. On THORChain, the room valuation is 3x external TVL, and in Maya, it's just 1x external TVL. So that might seem bad. It would be much more hard for us to be on the top 50 coins, but that reflects the efficiency actually of the protocol.
Yeah.
Essentially, by the time that we hold market cap as big as runes, is because we have 3 times the working capital and thus 3 times the yield. And something also to be mentioned is by this capital efficiency, it's translated into actual APY increase for the players involved. Because if you have $200 million of working capital on Maya, the yield that generates is only having to be split among those $200 million of capital instead of the $400 million that will be required on THORChain. So it like perceived APY will be increased, which is
Yeah.
good.
I mean, it makes sense that especially it makes a lot of sense versus the opposite. As if THORChain had that model and Maya had a different one, then it would be very hard to get something started that was in a kind of smaller category until then. And a
Yeah,
lot of not like we care that much what Bitcoin maximalists have to say, but like a lot of people, a lot of complaints is like, oh, you have to buy your own token. Like why do we need another token for this and stuff? Obviously, there's good reasons for that, but at least you need less of the other token to make the whole system
yeah.
work.
Yeah, and something important that like we saw that deterministic value does happen on THORChain. We've seen that that it holds true. So that is actually in favor of our model in the sense that a question could be asked like, "Hey, nodes have this bond. Half of it is in cacao. What if the value of Bitcoin increases harshly all of a sudden?" Well, actually, in that case, the external assets in the protocol increase, so cacao does as well. So your bond will always be commensurate to the external assets involved. So and the same likewise. Hey, but if it drops in value, cacao will also drop in value. Sure, but they're also protecting less assets. So it works out at the end of the day mathematically. And we have to test it obviously in the battlefield, in the real deal, in our launch very soon. But I think it's a model that is very much worth trying out. And also, if it works, and I believe it will, we've had it audited by Halborn Security. It came out it came out great. Our station will be out this week publicly for you guys to try and break it. Unified bug bounties also start this week for it. But if it works out, like we'll do everything we can to help THORChain transition to that model if it's interested. If the security measures hold, if the economic incentive see like they work out, because at the end of the day, what we need to have is an ecosystem with more liquidity, more yield, more volume, so that we can get better adoption. That's the end game. So whatever we can do to help in that position, we will do.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It's so. Does the different model at all get in the way of some of the features that THORChain is doing, such as the savers or like lending? Does it make it any more complicated because you don't have bonded, like purely bonded nodes?
It changes. Like right now, when we launch savers, will be off, and lending, of course, is not out anyway. So we have to plan it a bit. But rather than having to do with the bonds, it has to do with our reserve. We have a way smaller reserve on Maya than THORChain does. Um, so it does change a little bit. Uh, it doesn't mean that we won't be able to do it. It's just we will have to think more about it. It's not as easy as just turning it on. But we have synths from the very beginning. Hopefully, we can have savers soon after launch, and we will have to see about the lending mechanism and how it works. Obviously, interested in that regard. Something interesting is that we can also kind of A/B test, so slightly change a few of the conditions on lending and see, which protocol fares better, so that we can choose then the better design. Because at the end of the day, it's the early days of cross-chain DeFi. It has to be in kind of still some controlled experimentation mode in the wild. So happily having two protocols, Maya and THORChain, provides enough redundancy to be able to be a bit more out there in what we can try out.
Yeah, and so one thing I noticed being because I've been using crypto since like 2013 or so, right? It's been here a while, and it was a very Bitcoin dominated world for most of that time. And at some point, during during 2016, especially, but then 2017 even more. The Bitcoin blockchain became congested and it became very difficult for someone like me to try to live off of it. And there was not a lot of redundancy built into the crypto ecosystem. And it took a long time for that to be sort of figured out, even though, Litecoin was kind of created as a redundancy project almost, right, to Bitcoin. And it still took a long time for the space to then filter out into a properly redundant system where and the only reason that they did that to begin with was because Bitcoin was failing in a certain way, and the other projects sort of had to come in. And so I kind of might partially know the answer to this question, but is there any risk in Maya not being just no one using it because THORChain already works, and why would you support a different thing that does exactly the same thing, kind of?
That's totally a possibility, especially given that we are in a bear market.
Mm-hmm.
So what I can say is that we're doing our best to have value propositions such that we may attract enough liquidity to be viable. What does that mean? Essentially that slippage fees are small enough that swaps are affordable and we may provide them volume and thus yield to the capital involved. Thankfully, our capital efficiency increase and the fact that we give away all of cacao at the liquidity auction will make that more likely. But it can really happen that we do not. So in that regard, I would say three things. Number one, we would Ragnarok the chain when we launch if we didn't get enough liquidity to give back the liquidity to users. And we would try to launch again at the beginning of the bull cycle. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of Maya would go into hibernation. Number two is I hope that doesn't happen. Like I hope we've learned the
Mm-hmm.
lesson that redundancy is key. And I
Yeah.
hope we learn it proactively and not reactively, because reactively things always turn out a bit worse. And third, like we're doing as much as we can from our side of the court so that that future is likely. Now, importantly, typically redundancy just outright costs, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you have two motors on a plane, obviously that costs twice as much as having one motor on the plane. And people are not always willing to pay that redundancy cost. But on Maya, and speaking about Maya, THORChain, and how they can collaborate, not necessarily, because especially when you have the pair of assets on both projects, THORChain and Maya, so say a Bitcoin ETH swap, which we will both have, having both pools will most likely result in slower slippage. So the redundancy will actually uh, be uh, like cost saving in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that for large transactions, it will be beneficial for the actor to split the transaction into two smaller transactions that
Mm-hmm.
are simultaneously wired both through Maya and THORChain. Because as long as the transaction is large enough, slippage costs of just going through one route or the other will greatly outpace the double gas spent.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so you will actually save money by being redundant. Uh,
Mm.
so that and the fact that we will do arbitrage with each other, and the fact that we will increase the visibility of the technology and the network and validate all of that, hopefully makes it such that the redundancy actually was value generating instead of value extracting. Um, so that would be my 3 points. It can totally happen, and we have a contingency plan for it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we don't get to it because we need to do redundancy proactively, and hopefully people see and the market sees and that this redundancy is actually value generating, and that actually happens in the wild, and we see examples of it happening, that we may attract more capital into the ecosystem.
Yeah. So to kind of give an example of, I guess, a less technical example for people for using the Litecoin example, the sort of splitting between the two networks to reduce slippage costs would be sort of like if you're trying to send someone money and it picks between Bitcoin and Litecoin, depending on which one has the more favorable network conditions that day. It's like prefers Bitcoin, but if there's if the fees are too high that day, it sends it in Litecoin instead, kind of automatically. Although obviously it's a little bit of a rough example because the end result is not the same, because in that case you're sending two different cryptocurrencies, whereas with Maya it would be swapping the same thing. Now, can that be done automatically at the front end level? So like if I go to say Thor wallet and I want to swap, Doge for Litecoin, and it decides it can automatically calculate what the slippage costs would be, and so it decides to do two swaps, one on Thor, one on Maya, to minimize that. And I don't really even know unless I'm paying too close attention. Is that something that can happen?
Yeah, yeah. So it's something we've discussed actually with Thor Wallet,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen also a bit of interest on THORSwap side. But yeah, we speak about the optimal route on chapter 6 of our white paper.
Mm-hmm.
We actually gave the absolute optimal equation to calculate it, and implementing on code on the front end is actually relatively trivial. So what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing essentially is using that equation to see the optimal split of how much you send through THORChain and how much through Maya to save this amount, and then you compare that saving to the live double gas spending that would be required.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as one outpaces the other with some tolerance, because you need,
Mm-hmm.
since when you're calculating to when you actually execute the transactions, gas fees may change and
Mm-hmm.
the exchange rate may change. So you put a tolerance, say a 50% tolerance. As long as that is above that kind of buffer tolerance, you execute the transaction through both networks. So how it would look in the user interface is they would be by default on auto. Auto, what does it mean? It will send it to one network, the
Yeah.
other, or both, according to what's best for you. And then the user would strictly have to say Maya or THORChain according to their preference if they just want to use one or the other. And same
Mm-hmm.
for adding liquidity. So if I add liquidity, it will also, if it's only available on THORChain, it will only add on THORChain. If it's only available on Maya, it will only add on Maya. If it's available on both, it will add pro rate to their depths. If you leave it on auto.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then you just must explicitly state if you just wish one or the other. So that's more or less how it will look. We've all obviously prototyped it. It will not be in action, also, of course, when we're live, especially at the beginning, since we are kind of more risky, since we
Mm-hmm.
have less time on the wild. But at the beginning, it will just be strictly people saying that they want to use Maya, and that's fine. That's okay, while we kind of earn the name. But in the very near future, it would actually be trivial for UIs to implement it. And the reason why they're incentivized to do it is the first user interfaces to have this optimization will actually be cheaper than the other user interfaces. Because
Yeah.
right now that's not the case. All user interfaces, exempt their affiliate fees, have the exact same slippage because they're using the exact same pools. So once one user interface optimizes it through both pools, they actually have access to more liquidity, more options, and less slippage. So they would have an edge, and that competitive edge should then trickle down into having the rest of the user interfaces following suit.
Yeah. So instead of, for example, when you accept multi-coin payments, it's kind of like a more of a pain in the ass the more coins you have to accept. Whereas something like this, it's actually the opposite, where the experience gets better the more you accept, even if people just want to do the one thing.
Yeah, and it's also take into account that Maya and THORChain can have downtime.
Mm-hmm.
So also a user interface that doesn't have Maya, for instance, versus one that does, when THORChain is down, one will have volume, the other will not. And these user
Mm-hmm.
interfaces rely on volume to fund their operations. So yeah, it will bring just a better user experience. Maybe that day with THORChain's downtime or Maya's downtime, slippage will be increased for launch transactions, since they won't be able to go the optimal route. Uh, but they will be able to swap. The possibility will be there, which is like in the normal world. If there's less supply, then prices will be up for a few days, like
Mm-hmm.
we saw with logistics costs. That
Mm-hmm.
thankfully they're going down again.
Yeah.
But if you have to, you can. It's just more expensive. But people, the market has is willing to incur those costs when it's worth it. So yeah, we just again I restate. We believe it's great for there to be at least two players. I would even be happy to see a 3 to 5 in the coming 5 to 10 years. Obviously, every new network will have it harder, but I'm excited to see what innovations it will come up in order to be able to see the light of day.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
definitely interesting.
even at the crypto market caps the way they are today, I think that you could easily support a few. It's just that a lot of that is on centralized platforms right now. And so if that starts to migrate off of that, then you start to see that opportunity open up.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's not THORChain versus Maya, or even THORLikes versus Uniswap. It's centralized versus decentralized. So if you're in the latter team, uh, we just need to pull together, develop, build, use, share, and hopefully win the battle, because the future of blockchain relies on it, and especially now that more and more regulation will be coming to the space with FTS fiasco, and how governments want to actually push CBDCs. Uh, so it will get ugly, and we need to have other options very,
Yeah.
very soon. So we need to really pull together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now about the other options, uh, are there is the plan for Maya to just keep all supporting all the same chains as THORChain does around when they do, or is there like a different support kind of idea behind it?
Yeah, we wish to support slightly different chains. We both need to support Bitcoin and ETH, since it's the whole point of why there would probably be a lot of swapping.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin, ETH, and a stablecoin. So those would be kind of the same, but we want to branch out, since there are some chains that wouldn't really have the volume to warrant be on both chains. Remember, having a chain is costly for nodes, especially
Mm-hmm.
in this bear market cycle. So we need to be very precise in what we choose. So, for instance, Maya is dropping Dogecoin, Litecoin, uh, probably Binance Chain, Aaluxx. Uh, yeah, those would be dropped. Bitcoin Cash as well. And what we so we would end up with Bitcoin, ETH, Rune from THORChain, which is very
Mm-hmm.
interesting for arbitrage
Yeah, of
between each
course.
other, and kind of aggregation. And we're looking to have, in the very short term, Osmosis and/or Kuji, Binance Smart Chain, but we need to work a bit more on that. And hopefully, in the near future, next year, hopefully we can achieve also Dash. So I know that you like Dash, and
Yeah.
we've taken a look at the PRs and the code that they've worked on. It still needs a bit of work, and we also need to do a little of work ourselves in understanding how master nodes work, and
Mm-hmm.
technically at the technical level. I understand it economically and
Yeah,
in
of
the
course.
game theory sort of things, but the code is a whole other beast. Um, so yeah, those would be the four that we will most focus on. Another dream of mine, but it's a bit further down the road, would be Cardano. Well, I know many people are not big fans, but I respect the slow and steady approach,
Mm-hmm.
and I also think that it's a perfect candidate. It's a huge community with a lot of liquidity that is very, very siloed, and that's
Mm-hmm.
excellent for a
Yeah, of
for a
course.
liquidity protocol. The problem there is that they have a different cryptographic curve. They use
Mm-hmm.
ETSA instead of EXA, so that will present a challenge into how we design the Bifrost to be able to observe and sign transactions. So that has to be more worked on. We haven't honestly had the time. If somebody out there knows somebody from Cardano that want to reach out, especially those involved in kind of bridges, we've tried to reach out, haven't gone anywhere yet. Uh, but yeah, anyone from Osmosis, big Binance, uh, Kuji, Dash, or Cardano can reach out to us, and we'll be happy to collaborate.
Yeah, I could solve your Cardano problems in like 2 seconds. All I have to do is tweet, just say Cardano is honestly like a poorly designed chain. I don't know whoever uses this stuff. You're gonna have hordes of people from Twitter running on you, and you can just say, "Okay, you've changed our mind. We can add Cardano." Then you got them all. You got the attention. They're very angry when you criticize them. So if you say that, you might get the attention and then become the hero now for adding them.
Let's try. Let's try. Let's try. Yeah, I've had 2 or 3 leads that seem to go somewhere, but then I end up stuck. So I hopefully we can get with a high enough person that we can actually work something out. Because I think having a permissionless, unwrapped method of swapping ADA for Bitcoin and ETH, and being able to aggregate, with Sunday swap and the like, super powerful for Cardano's use cases. So yeah, hopefully we get there. Yeah,
Yeah.
the problem is at the end of the day, people that are kind of one chain maximalist can be even against building this infrastructure to connect, and I find that foolish. Design decisions always require trade-offs, and trade-offs leads to diversity. So we will always have more than one chain. Like I don't think that there will be the one chain to rule them all kind of approach.
Yeah, of course.
Trade-offs will lead to diversity, and there will be many chains. And we need ways to swap them in a decentralized, permissionless fashion. So hopefully, there's enough interest in these 5 communities to put enough attention to it, work, time, and liquidity, so that it's worth it for their users to coalesce with the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and there's some rumors that Decred, which was being built to integrate into THORChain, that the Decred team didn't want that at the end of the day because they have their own decks on their platform. It's just, and yeah, it's that kind of like siloed thinking. It's kind of different. Now,
Short-sightedness, I would say.
yeah. Now speaking of like, vision and stuff like that, one thing that's really been kind of in my mind for many years, but not nearly as much it's not nearly as, I guess, sexy in the crypto world or like demanded, is governance. And for example, like I built a lot of my own personal life around Bitcoin, around using Bitcoin, and then some people made design decisions on Bitcoin that did not represent my wishes and needs, and did not represent the wishes and needs of other people in the community. And there's arguments that it was the majority of people got the bad end of the stick, right? Or it could be a minority, but it's hard to tell without proper governance. And whenever I look at a project, get really excited about something new, I always look at what the governance model is. And in the beginning, I saw THORChain. I thought this is really exciting. I didn't see any like explicit governance stuff, but then I kind of ignored it a little bit, but then it became a little bit more of an annoyance over time. And I guess I'll explain why. Because I first heard about THORChain probably at the beginning of last year. And I think it was either from Eric Voorhees tweeting about it, or it was Chad Barraford on Naomi Brockwell's channel. But then I got interested in it and started using it. And then a bunch of people from the Dash community got really interested. And then a lot of people put a lot of money and effort into an integration, saying like, oh, well, this is how we do it. And then I think the Dash Investment Foundation put in like over 100,000 worth of USD into buying Rune just to help jumpstart liquidity and stuff. They spent a whole lot of money building the integration, and it's like it's coming up on like, it's almost over a year and a half later. In the beginning, there was a lot of like signs of like, oh yeah, we're gonna add this like any second now, and then it was like, well, and it was like a constant delaying, and then at some point it became like, well, let's do this feature first, and then at other point it became, well, we're scared about privacy assets at all, and then the Twitter account and the developers were all saying a bunch of stuff like, we're not going to add anything like that, and then the node operators got upset, and then they added in like a next chain vote mechanism for the node operators to kind of vote on that. And so then like when you have anything approximating governance, you get to see what's not just the noise, what like people actually want to do, what people holding the capital want to do. And it was kind of something different. And then it's just like, all right, well, these are the chains that are added next. But then Nine Realms decides, well, we're going to add this feature instead. And it's become this whole like lack of clarity thing became kind of I mean, obviously, personally, because I'm pretty involved with the Dash community, but also the Zcash community as well has been trying to do this. The Monero community is trying to get on there too. And I know there's a lot of projects who invested a lot of time and capital into promoting THORChain, being like, this is a great project. Everyone use this, all that stuff, directing their communities there, and actually putting money into it with certain hopes and expectations. But because of a lack of governance, that kind of ended up being like, I guess, a lot of a waste in a lot of ways. And the lack of clarity, I think, has caused a lot of projects to get burned. So, have you thought of anything about like explicit governance in Maya, or ways of saying like,
Sure.
this is a chain of command, this is who makes the decisions, this is how we know who's making the decisions, et cetera, et cetera?
Look, I think there's nothing inherently wrong with THORChain's governance. I believe it's actually the way to go. The problem is it's already a much more mature project, and
Mm-hmm.
mature projects tend to be more conservative,
Mm-hmm.
which is good. They're conserving what they have. They have to be
Yeah.
very jealous about the current wealth, the current assets, and it's good that you have conservative systems. They provide stability, they provide certainty, they provide assurance. Actually, I don't criticize THORChain's decisions collectively, and I do believe that people holding the most skin in the game, which in itself are nodes,
Mm-hmm.
and should be at the end running the show. I also understand the frustration though,
Mm-hmm.
and the inherent kind of, you know, expecting something and then having those expectations be kind of, yeah, broken in some way. Uh,
Yeah, or
the
just a lack
advantage
of
here, I would
clarity.
say, is, yeah, I would say on privacy, it's a difficult topic. There's something being worked on by people in the ecosystem. I can tell you that as an option and for Monero, and then in the future Haven, Zcash, and the like. Um, in the case of Maya, we can be more liberal, and that's actually the whole point. Also,
Mm-hmm.
having this redundancy, we have no capital at stake at this point in time. We have no nodes that have this kind of inherent need to protect their little kingdom, so we can afford to be a bit more out there. But eventually, Maya, 3 to 5 years from now, will most likely end up being more conservative, and there will be this next thing where we can be more experimental and more out there. So I would just call it more like a life cycle of the protocol
Mm-hmm.
than a bad design decision. So actually, right now with Maya, like there's a rush to have these new things
Mm-hmm.
set out and to have the culture of the protocol from the very beginning be around these principles and these communities and these chains, so that it's already there before it turns into a more conservative protocol. So we need to kind of be in a rush of having as much functionality, as much work, as much chains, and as much people involved, because we will also want to conserve that in the future. Uh,
Yeah.
and this is you, this is me. Uh, you just, decisions are larger with larger stakes. It's like thinking about your own life when you're just a person versus when you're already a father.
Mm-hmm.
People depend on you then, and you can't just take the same risk approach. So yeah, Maya can be can afford to be more risky. We have clarity that we want these 5 chains in the future. Privacy, there's another route for that I believe will be the best for that approach, especially given the regulations that are coming,
Mm-hmm.
um, and understanding, doxing and all of that. It's also part of the reason we need to remain pseudonymous, because it's gonna get tough. It's gonna get very very tough with regulations, KYC, AML, and the less attack vectors we have, the better, but also the less red flags, the better. So it's at the end of the day, for the long run, 10 years from now, it's not even gonna matter. I think blockchain will win the longer race. Just we see past examples of these kind of breakthroughs like separating religion from state, and all of that.
Of course.
The whatever the people want and whatever is actually better ends up winning in the long term. But in the short term, there's a lot of protection, and a lot of strength to the incumbent. So yeah, I believe in the longer term, we will forget about KSC AML. People will be able to work on these fully doxed, and it will be a much more approachable space. But in the meantime, you just have to take precautions and be very mindful of the reality, which is uh, things will be tough.
Yeah. I mean, it will be interesting times we're gonna live in. So, what's the Maya roadmap like? So, you have a release soon. Is that this year or is that not?
um, I think we would be kind of ready this year. We're really very close now, but it doesn't make sense to launch through Christmas and New Year's. The
Mm-hmm.
launch takes 21 days, so I don't think it's wise. So I'm like a few days away from finally setting a date, which I hope will be one day in January. Once that day is set, well, it will be just getting ready for launch and bootstrapping everything we need to bootstrap, and
Mm-hmm.
just going through those motions. Um, Once we launch, it's 21 days of the liquidity auction, which you can see how it works. It's actually a pretty cool design in order to distribute cacao to people that add liquidity. You're essentially getting cacao for free, if you can see it
Mm-hmm.
that way. And after that is having Aztec online. Aztec is our smart contract layer that runs parallel to Maya. And then after that is just going harder on the dev community and smart contract and all of that. In the meantime, in parallel is adding new chains. I already told you the five that we're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be able to say what order they will be happening in, and even if some of them might or might not be from launch, but that would be worked on in parallel. We essentially have the Maya team, which will now focus on reliability of Maya and adding more chains, and the Aztec team, which essentially focuses on maintaining Aztec, its reliability, and attracting more devs and smart contract usage. And that's it.
Yeah. So at
That's kind of the,
launch,
the, the next year play.
yeah, at launch, what end user products will be supporting Maya? So, is it launching on, let's just say, THORSwap or Thor Wallet is going to be in there like at launch?
Yeah, Thor Wallet will be our official launch partner. We've been working very closely with them. We announced our collaboration a few weeks ago. I've been very close to Marcel since Austin,
Mm-hmm.
where we met each other at the CrossChain Expo.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're working already in integrate. They already made the work to integrate in our StageNet. We already noticed a few things that need to be worked out, which we have been ironing out. And yeah, you will be able to uh, participate in Maya's launch either through Thor Wallet or your terminal if you're dev oriented, or some other teams can have us integrated already by then. But I can tell you that Thor Wallet has already spent significant resources into this, and he's definitely the one we would be vouching for the most. But yeah, Thor Wallet is a great app, uh, both on web as well as iOS and Android, and go test it out if you haven't used it yet. I love
Yeah.
what they're doing, and they also have stuff like fiat on and off ramp, and they just added savers today for THORChain,
Hmm.
so very proud for them for that. And yeah, if you check them out and you're actively using them, it will be trivial for you to participate in our launch.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, where could people follow you and find more about what you do, and then also follow Maya?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter at Aaluxx Myth, just how you see written here,
Mm-hmm.
Aaluxx, Myth, Myth. And you can follow me there. You can also follow Maya Protocol. Uh, I think we just changed our handle to Maya underscore protocol. And I highly encourage you also to go into our Discord. Now, I will be sharing with you a link tree with essentially your care package, like or
Mm-hmm.
Twitter or Discord or white paper, a podcast, everything to get you started on Maya and what we're doing. We also have the Maya Academy with 11 articles so far, explaining in very, very good detail and very kind of didactic
Mm-hmm.
everything about Maya or functionalities, how it works. So I highly encourage you if you're interested to check out those articles, especially if you don't like much to read white papers or dig too much around. That should set you up quite nicely. And yeah, we're very active on Discord, addressing questions. We have the amazing support of LP University helping us moderate there and address questions. And we have some quests going on for you guys to earn a bit of our investment token. There you can see about them on our Discord and participate. So definitely a lot to do. Shout out also to the Maya Mask project. It's just some official NFTs from Maya Protocol. They're available on OpenSea. If you like NFTs, you can also get involved that way. They will get some staking rewards essentially. And yeah, that's Maya Protocol for you guys.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks for being on today, and hope you have a good one.
You too. Thanks for having us, and see you next time.